In the freezing winter of 1787, a group of angry farmers marched toward a federal armory, ready to seize weapons and possibly overthrow their own government. They weren't foreign enemies. They weren't criminals. They were American war veterans. Men who had fought for freedom, now preparing to rebel against the very nation they helped create. Why? What could drive patriots to become insurgents just 4 years after winning independence? And here's the part most people don't know. This rebellion didn't just shake a state. It nearly destroyed the United States before it even began. But to understand how close America came to collapse, we have to go back to a country that was already falling apart. The year is 1783. The Revolutionary War is over. America has won. But victory comes at a cost, a massive one. The new nation is drowning in debt. Congress is broke. States are struggling. And the system holding everything together, the Articles of Confederation, is barely functioning.
Now, imagine you're a farmer in Western Massachusetts. You've just spent years fighting in the war. You come home expecting stability, maybe even prosperity. Instead, you find taxes, crushing taxes. Not in crops, not in goods, but in hard cash. And here's the problem. Cash is incredibly scarce. So what happens if you can't pay? Your land is seized. Your livestock sold. Sometimes you're thrown in prison. Let that sink in. Men who fought for liberty are now locked up because they can't pay debts.
One veteran reportedly said, "I have been greatly abused, have been obliged to do more duty than others, yet I am now treated as an enemy." And this is where we meet the man at the center of it all. Daniel Shays, a former Continental Army captain, a farmer, a man who had fought at Bunker Hill and Saratoga. Now, he's in debt, like thousands of others. And he's about to become something far more dangerous than a soldier. He's about to become a symbol. But here's where it gets crazy. The government's response to this crisis? It made everything worse.
Massachusetts leaders, many of them wealthy merchants from the eastern part of the state, refused to ease the burden. No tax relief, no paper money, no mercy. Why? Because creditors wanted their money, and they had the power to get it. Courts began seizing farms at an alarming rate. Foreclosures spread like wildfire. And people started asking a dangerous question. Is this the freedom we fought for? So, farmers began organizing. Not violently, at first. They held meetings. They drafted petitions. They begged for change. But when that didn't work, they took a different approach. They shut down the courts. Literally. In town after town, armed groups blocked judges from entering courthouses, preventing land seizures and debt collections. This wasn't random chaos. It was organized resistance. And Daniel Shays became one of its leaders. Now, what most people don't know is, this movement wasn't just about money. It was about power. Western farmers felt completely ignored by the coastal elite. Different economies, different priorities, different realities. Sound familiar?
But wait, here's where things escalate fast. By late 1786, the protests weren't just protests anymore. They were becoming a rebellion. And the government? they started to panic.
Massachusetts Governor James Bowdoin saw what was happening, and he was terrified. Because this wasn't just civil unrest anymore. It was armed insurrection. And here's the problem. The federal government couldn't help. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress had no standing army, no real power to intervene. Think about that. A rebellion, and the national government is basically helpless. So what did Massachusetts do? They took matters into their own hands. Wealthy merchants funded a private militia. Yes, private money to stop a public uprising. Meanwhile, Shays and his followers had a plan, a bold one. They were going to seize the federal armory in Springfield, thousands of weapons. If they succeeded, they could turn a rebellion into a full-scale revolution. And this is the part that changes everything.
January 25th, 1787. A bitterly cold day. Snow covers the ground. Shays and about 1,200 men march toward the armory. They're tired, hungry, but determined. They believe they're fighting for justice, for survival, for the promise of America. But waiting for them is General William Shepherd and a militia force. Cannons ready, orders clear. Do not let them pass. And then they open fire. The first shots explode through the freezing air. Grape shot tears into the advancing farmers. Men fall instantly. Others scatter in panic. The rebellion breaks. In minutes, 4 men are killed, dozens wounded. The rest flee. Daniel Shays escapes, barely. And just like that, the uprising collapses. Or does it? Because here's what most people miss. The real impact of Shays Rebellion wasn't the battle. It was the fear. Leaders across the country were shaken. Deeply. If farmers in Massachusetts could rise up, what's stopping others? Virginia? Pennsylvania? New York? Was the entire country on the brink? Even George Washington, who had retired from public life, was alarmed. He wrote, "There are combustible..." Just months later, in May 1787, delegates gather in Philadelphia. Officially, they're there to revise the Articles of Confederation. But in reality, they're about to do something far more radical. Rewrite the entire system of government. Shays Rebellion is fresh in their minds. A warning, a lesson, a fear. They realize something crucial. The United States is too weak, too divided, too unstable. It needs a stronger central government. And so, the Constitution is born. With powers the old system never had. The ability to raise an army, to tax citizens, to maintain order. In a very real way, Shays Rebellion helped create the government we live under today. But what happened to the rebels? Most were eventually pardoned. Even Daniel Shays. He lived out his life quietly, far from the spotlight. But his legacy? It's complicated. Was he a hero, fighting injustice? Or a threat to a fragile nation? Historians still debate it. And maybe that's the point. Shays Rebellion forces us to ask a difficult question. What happens when the people lose faith in their government? When economic pressure becomes unbearable? When the promise of freedom feels broken? Because the truth is, this wasn't just a rebellion about taxes. It was about fairness, representation, power, and who America is really for.
And here's the unsettling part. Those questions, they never really went away. So next time you hear about protests, economic struggles, or political division, remember this moment, when a group of farmers nearly changed the course of American history. And ask yourself, if you were there, which side would you be on? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's most overlooked turning points, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories that shape the nation. Because history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding the present and maybe predicting the future.